Hi, everyone. There were supposed to be more people joining, but so I don't know what happened, but we only have three commissioners here. So I don't know how you guys want to proceed.
August.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, we can give it a couple more minutes. Hopefully people come, but yeah, I had RSVP. So, this is one of those things where people last minute can't make it, don't show up, forget. Sucks.
Do we need a quorum then to vote on minutes?
I would say yes. I'd say we can hold that off, and if you guys want to just have a quick discussion.
That's fine with me.
Yeah, okay, I'll just send the city advise that there's a phone-in option. There is a phone-in option. We allow people to call into Zoom meetings. I just have to find the call-in number because I never send it out. But I'd have to dig for that. So you give me a second, I can send it.
Allison, if you had you and I probably had the same comment on the minutes.
What's your comment?
Oh, it was actually something you said, section 3, letter C about, I don't have it in front of me, but I think the intent was to say something like, assigning significance has more to do than.
I don't have it open either, but I can.
Okay, I just
I'm
got it.
afraid I might forget it between now and the next meeting if we can't have this meeting.
No, you can make the comment,
Yeah,
we just don't
yeah.
vote on it. And then I'll change it and then it'll be,
Yeah, I can find it. I can dig it up too, probably. But if Allison's closer than me.
You don't remember which section it was in? Because I talk a
Yeah,
lot.
it was section 3.
you can open it as well.
And then it was the C under section 3. And it starts out Chair Allison Frazee, etc.
Chair Jackson stated that she read the minutes and had seen similar presentations given by the planning department on Article 80, that it's critical for the entire process is infused with historic preservation considerations. She stressed that Article 85 is the only preservation tool the city has outside of landmarking, but whether a building is saved is much more about whether it meets preset historic thresholds. She expressed that there are environmental reasons to
That's the sense. It's about more than that. I think that was the intent.
Whether a building is saved is much more about whether it meets.
Yeah, but much more than, you're right.
Yeah,
That was it.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll make
Thanks.
it.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that.
Let me make a note before I forget.
Yeah.
All right, 3C, sorry. Okay, all right, I made a note, I will change it for the next meeting. Phone number is on the notice. Yes, I will send you that now. It's just gonna take me a bit of time, Frank, sorry. All right. While I do that, do we wanna review the agenda and discuss what's on it? And okay, so we're not gonna do that. I had the commemoration commission for the 725 meeting. If we wanted to debrief and talk specifics and how we felt in terms of legislation and preservation tools and what we wanted to take away, and what we wanted to present back to the city.
So you wrote a draft, right?
Of the 725 meeting minutes?
Or no, the report.
Yes, I did. And
Yeah.
I sent it out to you guys
Right.
ahead of that meeting. But I've actually delayed on sending it to the city clerk because I wanted to include that meeting in the updates, and I wanted to include some of the things that we had all discussed in that meeting.
I don't recall that I had any comments on the draft. I think across the committees, the emphasis is on needing funding.
Right.
And I think it's probably much more prevalent in the other ones who are trying to pull off events and create things. But as we've talked about in this committee, we need funding for some studies. And so I think emphasizing in the report or in a summary of the report or whatever you think people are going to pay attention to, that we need dedicated funding.
Yeah. Sorry, I agree. I just found the number that to send to Frank. So I'm doing that now, sorry. Okay. Yes, I agree, and that's there, and I think especially the events, exhibits, and trails subcommittee also, when I just met with them this week, they mentioned just saying, putting a number out there and having it on record saying this subcommittee thinks it needs this amount of money to do 3 things that the ordinance asks of us. So if that's, because that seems to be the approach that the city will engage with more than, the city being proactive about. Because it's about funding something they don't know what they're funding. That's what it seems like.
Mhm.
Do the other committees, I mean, how close are they to coming up with a dollar amount?
The events, exhibits, and trails subcommittee, Timelines, Archives, and Curricula hasn't discussed it yet. But events, exhibits, and trails said, we're gonna put out a random number. We're gonna say we want $30 million and then work from there. So
And
that's
what is
how
that?
they're approaching it.
And what does that $30 million cover? Is that actually creating exhibits and trails and all of
Yeah,
that?
so they are saying we allocate 10 million for events, 10 million for trails, 10 million for, an archive, museum, hybrid situation.
And that would include staff to,
Yeah.
right.
I wouldn't, right, so they're like, so we put that number out there and then we like work it down based on what ends up becoming a realistic.
It's a little different with this committee because those committees actually ultimately, I guess, would be responsible for staging them. Whereas our dollars would be spent by, they would have to be given to the landmarks department, correct? Because that's who would execute. So
No, so it would be the same. The other subcommittee still won't execute, so it would be like, it would be going to
to whomever, okay, of
whomever.
course, yeah.
Yeah. So similar concepts, but it's so strange still. I don't really understand how, how that gets you guys invested in the process if you guys don't have any say over. I mean, ultimately you would have a say, and this is how we think you should spend that money, but yeah.
I mean, ultimately, our mandate is just to make recommendations, right?
Mhm.
But I think we can make the argument that in order to make educated recommendations, we need
We
some
need,
studies.
right, true,
Mhm.
yeah.
So I think our job would be to come up with what is the scope of those studies, who we want to do them, and what they would charge to come up with
Right.
a number.
Yeah, it's almost like an RFP process. Like we need somebody to run a sort of, investigative discovery process to determine, how to price something like that out.
I think that's a good point, Amanda. I think we could, we've been
Well, I have,
wanting to do
Minor
studies for a long
comments.
time now, so we've had different discussions at different points of what studies we might do. So I think with this group, maybe when we have more people, could just narrow that down. What is it we want to look at? And then from there, we could put out an RFP and send it to some. There aren't that many firms that do this work, but there are enough, I think, to warrant an RFP and get some proposals back.
So is it like, maybe it's like a project manager, right? That knows how to sort of do a process like this from, beginning to end. Is that what we ask for? Like a dedicated, project manager, staff person that can sort of walk us through, right? Because we still have to do like vision and, you know, what we sort of want to recommend. Because we're nowhere near like, I mean, I know, you know, officially we're nowhere near saying we should do a citywide study report, right? Even though I think that's where we're going.
I think we are ready to say that, a citywide
Yeah.
survey,
Yeah.
yeah.
But
I feel
officially,
like
you know,
we-
like officially, this is what our committee recommends, you know, do we have to recommend that to the larger commission and then voted on at the commission?
Mhm.
Because if that's all of the case, then we're still, you know, 2 months out from getting like an official, you know, recommendation from the commemoration commission. And
It's
then what's
frustrating
next?
because this is something we've asked for 10, 15 years, you know, I think it's so well understood. And I do think that we have enough expertise between staff and Allison to be able to fairly accurately estimate what this stuff would cost. What do you think, Allison?
Well, I think it depends on what we want. A citywide survey of historic resources is definitely going to be the harder request. When I brought this up, I met with different responses. Sometimes people say, well, we don't need it because we have neighborhood surveys, you know, and you know, we're working our way around the city and we'll get there. Or we have old surveys or something. I think those of us that work with in this space every day realize that's not adequate. So we want to do it a little differently. So if we're working through OHP, I think we have to work through MHC, which means we have to use their process, which would be a lot, it would be complicated. It's not
And I
unachievable.
thought we decided that wasn't gonna do for us, right? It's too limited in scope.
I agree. So if the
Yeah.
money we would get would go to OHP, I don't know how we get around that though, Lynn. So how, is there another way to do
Mhm.
this?
I mean, the money, I don't want to say that the money could go to a different department because I don't know how comfortable we would feel about the planning department being the ones who are overseeing.
I don't know
that.
that makes a difference. The planning department's in the city as a certified local government. My understanding from when we've had these conversations over the past decade, that it would have to go through MHC, at least to some extent, but we should get some clarification on that. On
Yeah.
if that's a legal requirement, that we would need to follow that same process and use the same forms and all that, or if we called it something different, and if we just sort of said, this is different than that, can we, and I know that Squares and Streets is doing something sort of similar to what we had in mind. They're calling it like cultural mapping, and
Mhm.
it's not anywhere near the degree of detail that we want, but if we framed it differently, could we avoid that complication? I think you probably need the city legal counsel to weigh in on that, and or someone who understands. I don't understand that process, so need some help there.
Okay. I can bring it to the legal counsel and see what they say.
That'd be great, and then we'll know if we can go that route, if we can pursue a citywide survey of some, you know, however we word it or frame it, then I think that's probably the big ask. If they're asking for multi-millions of dollars, then, you know, what we need would seem like a drop in the bucket compared to that.
Mhm.
But I also think that smaller monies, if we want to do an economic survey of what the benefits of historic preservation, the benefits of building reuse, job creation, impacts of climate, you know, building reuse on climate, there's so much data that we really need to be able to further, you know, our preservation priorities. A lot of time it's very anecdotal, or we're basing it on studies that were done in other cities. So if we could do a study that's hyper local to Boston of why reusing buildings and historic preservation is beneficial for all of those things, tourism, economy, jobs, affordability, climate, I think we could have some real numbers to put behind our messaging, and that would go a really long way. And that some groups do those studies all the time, like that's their bread and butter. So that wouldn't be hard to do, and it wouldn't cost anywhere near as much as a citywide survey. So maybe that's the lower hanging fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something we could incorporate into this report that we're sending
Mm.
currently?
Even though it's already in there, but you know, it's like some in the goals, but I can flesh that out a little bit more to say that this is a need.
Be great. And I can try and come up with some rough numbers, again, depending on, when I've talked to some firms that do this work in the past, it really depends on exactly what they will study. As to how much it costs. I would estimate between 50 and 100,000.
Okay.
For a really good comprehensive study, which is, if we're gonna do it, that's what we want. Any other thoughts though on what we would want studied, just off top of your head? We can dig into it a little bit more. I know one thing that my predecessor, Greg Gaylor, always talked about was doing a study. And the data might already exist, it's just a matter of collecting it, but we see a lot of time developers target larger lots, which usually have older properties on them, and then demolish them for bigger projects. So if we could have an assessment of where those larger lots are and what's on them, that would help us direct our advocacy so that we can be more proactive and less reactive. I'd love to be able to collaborate more with other advocacy groups. I know that with a lot of these development proposals, we're losing not only heritage trees, but tree canopy, which leads to heat island effect. So I think that they might have some more data on that kind of stuff that, you know, we could work together with them. Same thing, I saw one proposal that takes down an old rectory with several large trees and builds lot line to lot line. And so that has an effect on porosity and flooding. So I think our interests overlap with a lot of other interests, and these other advocacy groups might have more data at hand that we could, take advantage of.
That makes sense. So this is part of the funding opportunities discussion, I think. Do we want to talk more about that, or do we want to identify those opportunities, or do we want to move on?
My only other thought on that was something that Chief White Hammond brought up, was I think got put on the back burner, but the idea of doing citywide studies of multiple things at the same time. So if, I know there's already a tree canopy map, but if someone else is interested in studying trees or porosity or anything else, like we could combine efforts and do one study at the same time, and that might, there might be more appetite for that, funding that at the city, than if it were just for historic preservation. So it's just something I think we should continue to keep front of mind.
Yeah. That makes sense. Allison?
Hi, I know I'm not supposed to talk till 3, but you have a small meeting. The RFP that the planning department has out right now, it's called land use. I don't know if any of you have looked at it. It's has a huge scope of what they're asking consultants to look at, and the responses are due, I believe, next week, but it's definitely worth looking at for what some of these topics might be included in that analysis, that they're asking teams to do a citywide study of how land is being used now and could be used in the future.
That's interesting, Allison. Do you have a
Yeah,
link
very.
to that? I haven't
I mean,
seen
so you haven't seen it yet?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, Caitlin Copinger is the project manager for it at the planning department. A lot of teams have bid for the package, but there's also a lot of questions because the scope is so large and the topic is a little fuzzy. Um, I, I, I don't know if they're going to extend the response time, but the Q&A that they had a week or so ago, there were over 20 questions about it. So it's worth looking at. It's under the procurement tab for the planning department.
Right.
Sorry.
Thank you, Allison.
Allison, is it called, I'm just trying to find it, Citywide Land Use Impact and Needs Assessment?
Yes, that's it.
All right, I'll put the link in the chat.
Thank you. You're faster than I could be. And they're looking at assessments of what particular neighborhoods might be lacking, but again, it's kind of vague. So whether, I don't know how much historic preservation is called out in it, but your question about large lots is definitely probably something that will be analyzed there.
Okay, I'm gonna take a look at that. Thank you for sharing that. It wasn't on my radar.
Yeah, I think this is great. I can potentially reach out to that project manager and see if they would consider or would be considering any historic preservation aspects. I know it might be too late if it's, oh, it closes in 3 days. So it might be too late, but I can
Right. Yeah.
flag any of them that do have historic preservation considerations, if any.
Hennessy, what do you think, just for the, utilizing this meeting, what if we brainstorm some, I think we wanted to do some bullets on Article 80 reform. So we could just sort of brainstorm together some thoughts on that to have in the minutes and then get feedback from hopefully a larger group at the next meeting, just get the ball rolling.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I'm curious who's been able to spend any time with the Article 80 reform process or had time to think about it.
Nope, not much.
My understanding, and that's only from our meetings and reading the minutes, but it's moving along so painfully slowly, and it's all kind of, it's vague that our opportunity to engage, it's just not clear, how we need like an embedded people. I think, because I was thinking about this relative to Article 85, and I don't know where we end up with Article 85, but there, things could happen with Article 80 that could have a very dramatic impact on Article 85. It could make it obsolete, or it's almost like, can you even address Article 85 without knowing what Article 80 is going to look like?
That's where my head is that because like I said before, I really want to infuse preservation concerns into Article 80. So I feel like, and that's happening now. So I feel like we put our energy there. And if we are not satisfied with how that ends up, that would alter our approach to Article 85 reform.
So who's on the Article 80 team that represents us?
Nobody that says, that I would consider speaking up for a preservation voice. When the steering committee was first announced, I wrote a letter to the mayor asking for an additional seat to be added for a preservation voice. That was not successful. I talked to Chief White Hammond about it at the time, and she said that lots of groups were asking for additional voices, and so they just didn't expand it. So mostly, if you look at the list of the subcommittee, there are people that represent the interests of developers.
Of course.
Right. And then my understanding from the beginning was that they were hiring a consultant to help with the Article 80 process itself, but they were also hiring a consultant to help with the public engagement process. And so I've expected there to be a very robust public engagement process with lots of meetings and comment periods and all of that. So far, the little trickle of information that's come out to the public has been really difficult, like you said, to wrap your head around or know when is the right time to give feedback or weigh in. So that's why I feel like even though there's not an easy opportunity for this group to fold into that process, like I'm worried that it's going to get too far down the road without us having shared our thoughts. So I do feel like even if it's just thoughts, it's not formulated formal comments responding in a comment period, at least we're sharing our thoughts at a stage when maybe they'll have an impact.
Yeah.
So do we want to just, again, it's going to be a bit sketchy since we don't know exactly what they're thinking or proposing. But I think there's some things that from a preservation perspective, we know we want to see. If they're going to move into the cat, instead of IGs doing cats, we want to make sure that there's a preservation voice on the cats, or that there's a cat that weighs in on anything that involves historic resources. I'm not sure which way they're going to do it, but every project should be viewed through the lens of historic preservation, historic resources, character, context, culture, regardless of how they end up structuring the new community groups. Do we have any other thoughts on what we want to see with that or how to word it?
Going beyond Article 80, recommending that the planning department create a position for a preservation person.
I like that. I know we have some preservation minded design staff, but
Mhm.
that just happens to be the case. I don't know that it's anything
Right. No,
formal.
So a senior level position, I don't know what you'd call it, but whose job is to integrate that into the planning process.
I love that. Some sort of cultural resource manager
Mhm.
that understands why, all these things and can be at the table in every project, discussion. Do we know if other cities, I mean, we know that other cities have similar to an OHP office, but do we know if they have somebody that's that role, like that's their job?
Is that another survey, money for another survey?
Well, I can just ask colleagues, I can ask around.
Yeah, who was it at the larger meeting who said how woefully behind Boston was compared to Philadelphia? And I think this was in terms of planning for the big events, but I know there are a lot of cities that are far ahead of us in addressing preservation in a much more creative way.
I say it all the time in the context of things
Yeah.
like deconstruction and salvage.
Right.
Yeah. Other cities are doing a lot more with other policies, with demolition by neglect policies and fees and stuff that we haven't meaningfully even approached. But that's what we're here for, right?
Yep.
So, the other cities have. I think that's a great suggestion. So let me see what else I can find out. What that position looks like in other places. So what other ideas do we have about, I mean, I want to talk a little bit about climate related stuff.
Before you go there, I'm also reminded that there's still apparently, and Hennessy would know better than anybody, but this ongoing conversation about moving the landmarks department into BPDA. That certainly could change things. I would like to think. You know, kind of where that might be, if anywhere, Hennessy?
Yeah, I mean, I know that now that they're in the city, it's a possibility. I think that the new chief definitely doesn't want to give up on the Office of Historic Preservation just yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he sees the value in historic preservation and environment.
Mhm.
So that's one
Sounds
thing.
to me like it's not gonna happen.
Right. But it's not,
Okay.
he said, never say never. He wants to work with the Landmarks Commission first to see what they can do to make sure that it's a good fit.
Mhm.
But if at the end of the day it doesn't work, then it is still on the table as a possibility. I mean, I know that if it's just the BLC, that makes sense. If it's the Office of Historic Preservation, archaeology is very against going to planning. Because it doesn't make sense. And
Yeah,
I
of
don't know.
course, right, yeah.
I don't know
It's
that the
not as
Commemoration
easy as it
Commission-
sounds, right?
Right. I don't know if the Commemoration Commission makes sense in the planning department either. Now, if it's like, okay, that means that the Office of Historic Preservation gets dissolved and everybody goes somewhere that makes more sense, then that's another option that has been brought up and is to be considered.
Because it
Um,
did live there once, as you
right.
probably know, yeah.
Yeah, and that's what it says in its legal document.
Oh, really? Huh.
Yeah, that it's supposed to be part of the BRA.
Hmm.
That's what it said in when they passed it in 1975.
Hmm.
I mean, I asked Chief Sweat that question and I got, I think, the same impression. It's not on the front burner right now. I think there's a lot else going on. They're still hiring for the director and the deputy director, and so I think that's probably the focus for now, and then see how things go. And I wouldn't want them to move right now anyway, just because
No.
there's still a lot
Too much
to work out with the
flux,
move.
yeah.
Yeah, so I'd like to see the dust settle on that a little bit and strengthen the department, the staffing that we do have. And I think Chief Sweat has a lot of ideas. He certainly understands why preservation is a climate action tool. So I think we take advantage of that ally, at least while we have it, in case things do change one day.
I would agree.
Any updates on staffing, Hennessy?
So I know that they've posted the director role. I don't know yet about they said that they were going to create the like a deputy director.
So that replaces the executive, the ED?
Yeah, but it's like a deputy director / ED. So they would be doing that and providing a little bit of higher level support. And then they created a new role. We had the interim now why am I like architectural historian with Lori Conlon. And Jennifer came back after maternity leave, but they've now created a second position for that architectural historian. So I think they're gonna change the name, so it's not just architectural historian, but it's like a preservation manager, something like that. Like project manager, so that they'll help with the architectural historian, and they may be able to offer help in other places.
So is Lori staying on, or will that be a job that gets posted? Or
It's a job that gets posted because Lori was a year-long contract while Jennifer was away, and her contract ended in June. So we are hoping that she reapplies because she's great. I mean, she's a superstar, but it is going to be a job that gets posted.
okay, that's interesting.
So things are happening, things are moving, but no set updates yet on personnel.
I posted the link to the job posting. If anybody hadn't seen that yet, I
Yeah,
think the
thank you. I'm
idea-
just reading it.
Yeah, I think the idea is to fill that and then have that person be able to weigh in
makes
on
sense,
the
yeah.
deputy director role too. So.
Mhm. Yeah,
It actually looks very simple compared to the original. I mean, it's fairly straightforward and, yeah.
One step at a time. So, I am optimistic that, and I hope Hennessy you feel the same, is that the department is going to be set up for success once these roles get filled, and they have, everybody, all the support is there. so I think that for our role is how we can provide some sort of some tangible suggestions.
Mm.
Because I know while those roles are unfilled, it's probably a little difficult for staff to. I don't know to what extent they're engaging in Article 80 or having the bandwidth to think about Article 85 reform or whatever, but the more that we can put pen to paper and then get their feedback, I think would be helpful.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think it would make sense if they have a semblance, if they have an idea of what the commission is looking for in terms of a candidate, so that they can keep that in mind as, they assemble the team that will be searching for them, and they assemble the questions that they'll be asking.
Well, in terms of the jobs, I already shared my thoughts with Chief Sweat, but I think what we need for this director role is just someone obviously with experience, but that it's a lot of leadership quality that can be a very vocal advocate on the inside for us, but then also can connect with the public and advocacy groups, help people understand what preservation is and isn't, work with all of us as advocates to share messaging and priorities.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's definitely like, I think they're thinking of it as even more public facing role than before. And I think that that makes sense. I think that's part of the reason why they wanted this deputy director role to be more thorough. I mean, I wonder how that'll work out, but I do think that that's why they wanted it to be more thorough, because they wanted there to be a manager of the people in the department. And while the director will also be doing that, they'll have a little bit more flexibility to be that person that's going out there and connecting with community members.
Yeah, so the ED/deputy director is like the operations person.
Yeah, so it's
And
a
the
little bit so that there's an
Director is
external.
is the vision, needs to be a persuasive personality. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the intention, and I can see why that makes sense. And so the hope is that it works, of course, because I think that the historic preservation community needs a win.
Mhm.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Well, do we want to start talking about Article 80 then, Hennessy, a little bit in more detail? Well, one thing I know that I've been pushing for a lot, when I've engaged with the Article 80 process in the past, in Article 85, it feels like that in the formal process, there's no opportunity to talk about whether or not to keep the building until we get to Article 85, which is usually towards the end. Decisions have already been made, approvals have been given, and the owner and developer is just not interested in starting over and having a meaningful conversation about keeping the building. That conversation needs to be happening before they've even started doing architectural drawings or, put money into the project. And for me, we box ourselves in when we put limits on that conversation it has to meet some sort of threshold to be considered historic. We should be having that conversation with every building. Is this building viable for reuse? Yes, then let's explore that first. How do we add on to it? How do we expand it? How do we upgrade it? How do we make it into something that adds vibrancy, adds units or whatever they're looking to do without loss of the building? And that's not just because of potential historic fabric, that's one component, but it's for environmental reasons, for naturally occurring affordable housing and rent reasons. It's for, like I mentioned earlier, climate associated heat island effect, open space, air. That should just be something that we do by default. How do we do it with anything else? We always in our day-to-day lives look at something and say, does this still have use before we toss it? Right. And we tend to just toss buildings away without ever thinking about that. So my advocacy has been focused on having that be part of the formal Article 80 process. If you are as a developer, if you're considering a project, before you even purchase it, you know that you need to provide an analysis of embodied carbon, of demolition waste, salvage, and show why it's better for the environment, why it's better for affordability, why it's better for historic character and fabric, to take down what's there versus reuse it.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Before they purchase the property.
Yeah.
And that makes this, it's so much more compelling argument when you've got, it's very broad, you know. Some aspects are going to be more meaningful to some people than others, so, yes.
So I think, you know, the challenge is, how do we do that? How do we require that analysis? And we do have tools. There's the CARE tool for embodied carbon, where they can show, you know, concrete numbers about a carbon related to an existing building in a reuse scheme versus a demolition and ground up new construction scheme. So I think that could be incorporated into the required analysis. They already have to do some, you know, research on the history of the site. If you look through a PNF, there's a section where they're required to list any buildings that are on the National Register or local landmarks. They don't have to explain why they're tearing them down. They just have to list that it's historic. So I think we could expand on that a little bit. Like, it's not just whether it's listed somewhere. Have you made any effort to see if this building has meaning, it contributes architecturally to its context, contributes culturally? So I think it's kind of up to us to provide some guidance on what that looks like.
And that's where the citywide survey will help inform this, but not just listed somewhere, but inventoried. That captures a lot of properties that have been inventoried. It should just be automatically triggered. Hi, Chelsea.
How are you? Sorry, I was having technical difficulties. I have seen PNFs that just don't include that historic resources portion because they just don't do it. So I don't think BPDA is very good at, or planning department has been very good about enforcing that part of a project notification.
So that's one problem. It's like, you shouldn't be able to submit it if it's incomplete.
Skip it. Yeah.
But I do know they're trying to break it down. So rather than compile pages and pages and pages of information for a PNF, that you become that much more rigid around what you're willing to change. I think, if my understanding is correct, they're planning to break down exactly what's required and do it in stages, so that you can present basic information, get some feedback, then do a little bit more research and development and get feedback a little bit more. So I don't know exactly what that breakdown looks like. But I think what we would ask for is that at that very first early stage, which I think in the past would be pre-file meetings, when they go to the BPDA in the past and said, well, this is what we want to do with this site, and they get some just very casual feedback on it. That's the stage, however that's going to look in the new process, that we want them to provide information about the existing site. And something I push back on all the time, and project managers don't seem to change. If you go to a project page, it'll show a picture, a rendering of what they want to do, and then they'll have like a paragraph or two about what they want to do. More often than not, it doesn't mention at all if there's an existing building on the site. It's not shown in the picture, it's not in the description. You have to do your own research to understand if there's something on the site. To me, that's unacceptable now, and certainly moving forward. They need to present that information to the public. Then the very first stage, the first thing that goes out, here's what's on the site already. Here's how what's there contributes, here's what it means. Here's the tree canopy, here's, you know, whatever else. That needs to be included from the very beginning, before they start showing what they want to do.
I have a little bit of an update to give you guys, actually, that just transpired this past week. Am I still here? God, I'm doing terrible with technology here. So this is not Article 80, but it's Article 85, but it's about what is going to happen first from now on.
Right?
And I don't necessarily agree with this, but basically, a lawyer that we all know, Richie Lenz, made a complaint against.
We know him well.
Yeah, we know him from many different complaints that he makes. He's doing the same thing with Article 80, like he's drumming up business to complain about these things. He and one of his clients complained, and our lawyers agreed with them that we were asking for too much information in the Article 85 application. So we were saying, go get all your ZBA stuff done first. And they have now discovered that we have no legal way to ask for that. I mean, it's a good thing and a bad thing, because I know a lot of times they come to Article 85 when it's way too late. On the other hand, one of the main purposes of Article 85 is to avoid vacant lots. And so now we're going to be making judgments on demolitions, and there won't have to be a project in place right away or ever. So it helps by putting Article 85 up front, but it hurts us by sort of allowing people just to clear lots, because that's basically what we were doing, is just controlling the clearing of lots. And so that now lots will be able to sit vacant with no planned project for a long time. They have also told us that we can't ask anything about embodied carbon, because Nick and I were working on this part of the Article 85 application where you would learn, the applicant would have to do the CARES tool themselves within our application. And they said that we can't ask for that anymore. So we're going to be totally revamping the Article 85 application.
Why can't you ask for embodied carbon info?
It's just not part of our legislation at all. And I said, none of our application is part of our legislation. And they said, yeah, but you know, asking for photos is reasonable, asking for a plot plan is reasonable, asking for a fully designed project is not. So this was all through Tom Broom, our legal counsel. And, you know, I feel like it's a lawyer telling us how we can do our BLC business, and not us being the stewards of the legislation and carrying it through as we see fit. Doesn't matter. Alexa agrees with him and doesn't want to do anything that seems illegal or misguided or overreaching. So we are gonna, from now on, be seeing those things as soon as possible. And go ahead. Sorry, I don't know who that is, but
Frank.
Yeah,
Frankie.
hi, Frank here.
Mhm.
Thank you for that recitation. That's very enlightening. I just have a brief comment. It's something that we do run into where we're advocating, Hyde Park Historical Society or other neighborhood groups are advocating for a position, essentially, you know, follow the rules that we understand are in place, whether it's for park protection or, you know, wetlands protection or historic resources protection.
Mhm.
And a particularly proactive developer, through their attorneys, will say, we don't think you guys have the right to enforce that, or you don't have the right to enforce it in the sequence that you're proposing. And the city attorney, rather than saying, hey, this is the city's rule, we stand by it, if you don't like it, Pemberton Square Courthouse is across the street, we can meet you there and talk about it in front of the judge.
Right.
They fold, in my view, and kind of agree with the developer. And that's a policy decision, right? So the proposition that, for in this case, that the Landmarks Commission, if I'm understanding it correctly, cannot request a reasonable development-related question, such as embodied carbon, that's not a law. That's an interpretation, right? And
Absolutely.
so
I
that
agree
can
with
be
you.
tested. That can be tested in court,
Mhm.
right? By the city and by the developer. But the current practice, which I think is really unfortunate, is we find attorneys, city corporation counsel, perhaps with one eye on the revolving door, saying we agree with the developer, not with the public interest. So I just encourage, and I've talked to Chief Bryan about this directly too, and others, like, hey, the city has a policy position around things like resource protection and historic preservation. The solution, if there's a perceived weakness or vulnerability in the law, is to make a stronger law. It's not to concede. So that's just a theme that we're seeing in a bunch of different places, and I appreciate your forthrightness
Yeah,
in describing
mean-
it in this particular case.
Trust me, I definitely did my due diligence to sort of talk
Well-
about why this shouldn't be that way, but I think there's also a positive where we'll see Article 85 issues come up earlier. So,
Frank makes so many good points, and
Yeah.
I know historically, depending on who's sitting in that chair, who is, you know, our legal counsel du jour, because there've been
Right.
a
So
lot,
many.
and they aren't necessarily really well informed. More than anything, they want to avoid lawsuits, and
Yeah.
so it's always easier to give in.
Yeah. So
But
I
they-
I know that like you were trying to talk about Article 80 and I didn't mean to derail that, but
Hmm.
I do think that now that we don't require people to be very far down the line, like we can't ask, do you have approved ZBA documents, which means that you would have been through some amount of Article 80 by then. I think it's going to, like the historic resources topic is going to come up sooner. In
Chelsea,
large,
do you know, I mean, there's other sort of processes that comes into play also, right? For example, in addition to a landmark building, right? So do you think that that's going to translate to that where BLC will review an addition before the ZBA?
I don't think so because I think the landmarking legislation is differently worded. And all the historic districts legislations are differently worded. And it was just that Article 85 had nothing to justify ZBA first. So I don't think that the other applications are going to change. Then again, they haven't been challenged. So if someone challenges them, I don't know. But I think Tom Broom thought that those sets of language were okay to be asking for ZBA first.
Well, I mean, the reality is we have holes anyway. I think
Yeah.
you know, 2 buildings were taken down on Center Street in West Roxbury, and there's nothing there. And I think there's still a hole on Chelsea and Maverick in East Boston, as far as I know. So I guess it's good that this has come to a head and that we can find a better path forward that's can't be challenged legally. But I think it's all the more reason to put some of this stuff into Article 80 as part of a regulatory process that everybody follows.
Mhm.
And then I think we need to have a rethink on Article 85. Chelsea, how many historic resources do you think are saved as a result of the Article 85 process compared to how many go through it?
I mean, on my watch, none.
Mm-mm.
I haven't seen one be saved. I've only been here for almost 2 years, but I think that Roseanne told me like a couple had been
and
saved in
it
her
was-
tenure.
It was 14 years, and I'm not sure I can think of proposed projects have been improved.
Right.
Man, if it's less than 5, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I can think of is maybe the Collins Mansion in South Boston.
But that was that was through the landmarking process that really,
Right.
there was a combination of demo delay and landmarking, which is the same thing that happened with the church in Roxbury on Cedar Street. Same with the farm.
Yep.
What's the
So
farm?
it's
Yeah.
Yeah.
projects were within the Article 85 process.
And then
They
so- and
managed to get a landmark put in
an
place, which
emergency
is
designation, exactly.
which is about to happen again, I think, with something that we're looking at tonight. So it's very rare, I would say.
So what do we want Article 85 to achieve? I mean, the goal of demo delay, as we've talked about before, is not to delay the inevitable demolition. It's to disincentivize demolition from the beginning, or to provide enough time for a landmark or, someone else to make an offer. Or other cities have a requirement that you have to list the property at fair market value for a year before you can tear it down, or something like that. Like
Mhm.
there are other hoops you jump through in other cities, and our bar is so low it's not even meaningful. So I think we need to, like I said, I do think we start with Article 80 because that process is happening now.
Mhm.
And meanwhile, think about what we want from Article 85. We've always talked about extending it. It needs to be a fairly lengthy time period in order to accomplish any of our goals. I can't see how anything won't be challenged by some of these people that tend to challenge us on these things.
Well, I think it's really like two-step, and I think I came in when you guys were talking about the 2 job positions that were up right now.
Mhm.
So the OHP directorship is published. It's on the website, and we hope that you're spreading the word for good people to come to it. The deputy director position, which will also be the executive director of the Landmarks Commission, that was not posted at this point, and I gave some comments to Chief Sweat saying you're missing a major work objective here, and that is to accomplish a citywide survey. Like that should be top. That should be like the top priority of that job, and to solicit bids, get budget pricing, set a year, how many years it's going to take, how many years it needs to be updated, every 5 or 10 years. And I hope he hears that, that does need to be part of that person's job. And so I think it's really twofold with Article 85, which I'm not the one that came up with this. I think one of you said it before, is that first step would be to put a lengthier timeline on Article 85. And second step would be to be able to get rid of Article 85 because we have a citywide survey that works.
And
we've
build preservation into Article 80.
Right, exactly. So in my view, like that's still something that we should be looking at, because it could be.
Actually, Chelsea, we just discussed it before you joined the meeting
Right.
at length.
I'm
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely top priority.
Yeah. So I don't know if, I'm not sure that Chief Sweat listens to staff as much as he listens to stakeholders. And I think that's it's not him. I think that's like a trend of this administration. So if anyone wants to remind our leadership that needs to be a priority, please feel free to do so.
Well, we talked about it in the context of budget requests from the Commemoration Commission overall. And we thought there might be some lower hanging fruit that we could get funded more easily, economic studies, things like that. But Chelsea, one question we had that maybe if the city conducts a citywide survey, if it's through OHP or a planning department or whatever, if it's coming, the work's being done by the city, does it have to go through the MHC process, have to use the forms and everything that Macris, all that MHC uses, or can it be something completely independent?
It depends on who supplies the money. And if we want MHC to honor it. I think we do. I mean, I think we do need.
It has to
Yeah.
be part of Macros. I mean, all
Yeah.
this data. Even if it's just something that layers on.
Yep.
The inventory forms on Macros are really important, and that's a good starting point for an
Mhm.
individual property. We can
Mhm.
layer on.
But what if we started, and I'm just spitballing, what if we had something separate and we layered macros surveys into that?
Mhm.
'Cause
I
we could
mean,
also layer in other things like Atlas Scope and
Right.
right. And all the, the work that we were talking about during the last meeting about not just historic resources, but cultural resources and, artworks and things like that. Like, I don't know how MHC works very well. I think that's more Dorothy's bailiwick, but I think we want information that maybe MHC doesn't want. I'm not sure about that. But
And I work with MHC all the time, and that's all I'm doing is survey work. So
Yeah.
I have a pretty good idea of the data that they're interested in
They will
collecting.
accept.
And you're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It needs to be, those can be incorporated into our survey. But Chelsea, we have to keep updating.
Yeah.
We have to keep going after those
Form.
survey planning grants. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
there's so much of the city that is desperately needs to be updated or hasn't been inventoried yet.
Yeah.
well, back to Article 80, if our ultimate goal is to have an assessment of the overall impacts of a proposal. So of course we want them to understand the historic and cultural impacts, but also everything else I've already said, affordable and climate and all that. The more that information can be found in one place, the easier it is. So if we somehow had some resource that you could look at a site and understand its climate impacts, heat island, wind, shadow, we could layer in the Friends of the Public Gardens shadow tool or something like, and that way they could plug in their building and say, all right, well, we need to manipulate it this way, or we need to add on to the existing building in order to meet that criteria or expectation. The more that we have instruct developers, well, you need to look at 6 different places to do your analysis, and it centralizes all that information can be in one place, I think would make it easier for everybody.
Right. And there was some talk about layering it on to the existing zoning map, which is comprehensive. So everything in Boston is zoned and there are associated maps. And so there's a good place that already has all of the parcel numbers and all of, all of their zoning information. And why wouldn't we just be building upon that with our stuff, with our new stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
MHC, Macros has a statewide map,
Mhm.
and you hit the dots and up comes the inventory form for that property. So
Right.
it looked like that, except it would be a zoning map, and you
And it
could
would have
pull up
every parcel. Yeah,
could pull up 6 different kinds of reports on that. Yeah.
exactly. So
Parcel, right.
to me, it doesn't make sense that we would like create something totally new because it just sounds like so much work, but
More like combining existing data and then
yeah, and then adding.
gathering data where we don't have it.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it would be awesome if we could get all of the buildings of Boston onto Macros. But I think it's also, we have to look at it the other way. Like we want more than Macros. So
But I think they have to be, I don't think you can be independent of Macros. I think,
no, I don't think so either.
right, I think they have to be there too. Right.
Yeah, which would be great. I mean, believe me, I'm so excited when I actually find a Macros form for something. And one of Richie Lean's issues this morning was that we had provided a survey rating for a building that was not on Macros to begin with, and he was, up in arms about that. So it does hurt us when we don't have those forms in place and we're trying to save something. Sorry, I derailed your conversation yet again, Allison. I know you're trying to talk about Article 80.
It's all part of it. It all goes together.
But I think right out of the gate from this committee, we should be asking for a 12 or an 18-month extension of the Article 85 demo delay. And that would be a temporary means
Right, a stopgap.
to get that citywide survey done.
I think we should ask for a long, like, shoot for the moon kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Has anyone talked to Brian about that?
I haven't-
Does he know what it is? Like, does he know? Have we, Tennessee? I don't think we
About, no, we
have.
haven't.
We've had so few chances to meet with him so far. You know, and it's new, it's really early, you know, he hasn't been here very long. But I found myself wanting to add that to that job description and wondering like if he had even ever heard of the citywide survey and what that does, like, does he understand the benefit of it as a chief? And I guess it's our job as staff to sort of highlight that for him.
Mhm.
Go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, so this is just a continuation of the thread about the role of Chief Brian and the overall kind of Article 80 I'm focusing on as opposed to 85 at the moment. So a number of us community people had a sit down that included Chief Brian and Commissioner
Okay.
Ryan Wood and one of his architects on a proposal along the Fenway, which involves seeking an amendment, exemption basically from guidelines in place as to height.
Mhm.
And that contextualized had to do with, okay, how does review by the Parks Department fit in with overall review Article 85? And the fact is, and this is kind of where we talked with Brian a little bit more, things in his portfolio, whether Conservation Commission, Landmarks Commission, or Parks Commission, all in our experience are sort of at the end of the train that's driven by development and developers and by developer representatives like Attorney Lind and others that we can name. And so his reaction was, he's very receptive, you know, he's a very decent person in terms of just listening, was that there's a reason for the sequence that exists right now. And there's also deficiencies to the sequence that exists right now. And while the sequence has been discussed in some degree is discretionary, but in some degree is written into the enabling legislation. So, for example, Parks Department and Commission is required to be, quote, last. There's also the culture and the sort of advocacy that happens internally with the different cabinet heads all kind of contending with each other collegially, I imagine. And so I think part of our goal with 80 is to advocate to Brian, who seems receptive to this, at least to listen, to say, look, you know, your cabinet has a critically important role here. We need to have meaningful consideration at the earliest feasible part of the process for resources, natural resources, urban tree canopy, historic preservation, historic resources, and recreational to the extent that falls into Parks Department. And to have that not just sort of written into the legislation, but also part of the culture in the city so that when people like Attorney Lind advise their client as to what pathway to take through permitting and review, they're understood to say, hey, look, you can't just let this happen until the end. You know, you got to kind of deal with it up front. But right now they feel no obligation to do that. In other words, that's not the message they get from EPDA, now Planning Department. So I guess my takeaway from all of this is make sure that we, in each of our respective roles, advocate to Brian in a very meaningfully informed way, hey, this is what we think the solution is. And in terms of a couple of specifics that were mentioned, there already is a City of Boston zoning viewer. It's parcel specific. You all probably know pretty much about it. Developers invariably, potential property acquirers should click on it, see what's required. There's already flags for flood risk, for zoning, obviously, but also for historic districts. So that's kind of their notice, as it were, right? So they do know. It's not like it's a secret, but it's right there. And then aligning with macros, absolutely, but doing it with some sense of priority. So here's the absolute kind of top key, most endangered, most at risk, most vulnerable, most significant buildings that aren't listed already, and then just kind of going down from there. But really making Brian the internal champion of a lot of these things is kind of where I land based upon our recent exchange with him and then longer history with the city's distinctive process.
So would there be I guess I'm just wondering if like members of this group could schedule a meeting with him and say like, these are the 3 things that we're looking at and we'd like your guidance, but mostly your support.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why not. I will say that the September meeting, that internal project management group that the city has that's working on events wants to come to every single subcommittee. That's what they say. So that they'll be coming to us in September. But Brian, I think the chief could come in October if that works for you
Oh,
guys.
I actually meant outside of this forum.
Oh,
I think that
well,
maybe
it would
like,
have to be us, because quorum stuff. So yes, we could do that.
Chelsea, I'm happy to help you organize that with
Yeah.
just preservation committee advocates and residents, and then if you want to do staff and Brian, and we can sort of put our heads around priorities. Just
Yeah.
make sure that he understands. I mean, the point of this committee is to put formal recommendations to the city, which would include Brian, but it's to the extent that we can have Brian on board all along the way, I think would be helpful. And then of course, I think our real internal champion will be the director once they're hired.
Yeah.
So
but I don't think he would mind hearing this stuff. And I think it would just have to be bullets, right? Like, this is what we think should have happen with Article 80. This is what we think should happen with Article 85, step 1, step 2. And this is, whatever else we decide is necessary, because I don't think it would be useful to wait to have that conversation, even though he's incredibly busy. But I will put his assistant's email into the chat. And maybe we could just start. And I'm not, Hennessy I'm totally out of my depth. You know what can happen and what can't happen. I'm not asking for like an official committee meeting. I'm asking maybe for like a little sideline discussion.
Yeah. Would be fine.
Okay.
It's doable. As long as there's not a quorum, it's not a big deal.
Okay. Good. Stick that in here. And like I said, I think if it comes from stakeholders, like it might happen sooner. And let me just stick that there. So this is the person that really controls his calendar. Although I don't know when that new chief of staff is coming on, Hennessy.
Oh, I thought he already, because didn't he
Really?
introduce us to her? He introduced her and then the other roles and stuff and things that.
But I don't know when she was actually starting. I thought it might be September.
Okay, that might be true.
Well,
Mhm.
let's start. Why don't we start with
Everyone, I have to leave the meeting. I'm sorry. But this has been really productive, I think, even though it isn't official.
I mean, no worries. The meeting does end in 10 minutes. So if we want to.
Sorry, I need to run, but thank you.
Hi, Lynn. Good to see you.
So if we want to, start making sure we have our final thoughts and what we want to move forward with. I think what Chelsea brings up is a great idea. I mean, if I can do, obviously, as always, meeting minutes so that we can have them handy, and that can serve as a starting
Mhm.
point for our like bullet list if we want to just, use that as a guide.
Mhm.
And then we can start, setting up a meeting with a small group.
I do think it would be important to have something on paper for the full committee to respond to, just to make sure we're all on the same page. I wouldn't want to misrepresent someone on the committee that wasn't a part of any particular conversation. So, Hennessy,
So
maybe
we can distribute things, right? If we BCC Hennessy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can ask for comments back.
All right, so let's work on some bullets just based on all of the conversations we've had, what we think are our priorities, where do we want to see focus, with a larger conversation with Chief Sweat in mind, distribute that for comment, and then we can do this unofficial side meeting with him, and we can include some other people too. And then make sure that we're addressing any of his concerns or questions, and that he will be an advocate for us as we continue to develop our more formal comments that will come from the committee.
Right. I think he'll be an ally. I think it would be useful to sort of let him know what you guys are thinking, and that it sort of can't wait. Like, this stuff can't wait very long.
I
So
know.
you're-
Well, that's especially with
busy.
Article 80. It's all happening right now. But I mean,
Right.
we'll do this all again once the director is hired. Do you have any sense on the timeline of that? Does it need to be posted for any amount of time, or?
I have no idea.
I think the
Like-
closing date is like February, so it's just posted for as long as it takes, right?
Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the only thing I know for sure is that there's a preference to have that person in place before the executive director or the deputy director position is posted. I think that, like chicken before the egg, like one of those people has to be in place before the other is hired. And I think he chose to do the OHP director first.
Makes sense.
So Allison, I'm happy to start something. I'm happy to look at something over that you guys have done. Or you can totally leave me off, and that's okay too.
Never really go. The only thing is, I feel like we've had several somewhat disjointed conversations about Article 80 throughout, the course of our meetings. So we probably need to pull some bullets from those. And we've also touched on Article 85 here and there. We always sort of get derailed. So there's not a lot on paper. I mean, I have that one document we created years ago with the 2 columns of problems and proposed solutions, which everybody has. So we could start with that and then tweak it for, what the current, like the things you were telling us that have already been changed. So we have a starting point, but we need to, put it on paper and condense it all into something that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think it should be really concise. I think, like, I'm not sure we need to include all of the discussion that happened early on in regards to like Director Miller's wanting to like hook it into environmental policy. Like, I think what we need to do is concrete suggestions. We make a change to the timeline within the zoning ordinance of Article 85. Number 1, we get that voted on by the Zoning Board of Appeals or whoever has to vote on it. And number 2 is that's in place until we have a citywide survey that is usable, like that is useful. And I don't think I've heard tons of objection to that, but I haven't been at every meeting, so you can be the guide there.
Well, I think concrete suggestions, like you mentioned, are definitely the end goal of this group. I don't know if we're quite ready for that yet, because some of it we just haven't discussed thoroughly or fleshed out. And then, of course, when we don't even have quorum, like I said, I don't want people to feel like they didn't get the opportunity to weigh in on something. But
Yeah.
I think we have enough to go on at this point where we can present high-level priorities, high-level thinking. This is where we definitely see problems with the process. Here's some ideas we have that we're working on. and get some at least general feedback for now on where we have buy-in from him or where he has questions or concerns, and keep workshopping it.
I think that's great.
There's going to be a political, component to this as well. So it's going to be verbalizing what we've discussed and seeing what we have support for and where that's going to go. And so it's a
Absolutely.
big project.
Yeah. Allison, are you here as a reporter or as a preservationist today?
That's always a good question, isn't it, Chelsea?
Well, I want to share something but it would not be able to
Oh,
be.
I understand. Oh, okay.
You can't write about it.
No. Today's meeting definitely just as a citizen. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here's something interesting that I don't know how to take this, right? Yesterday, someone told me that they had heard that there was no appetite for new historic districts to be chartered. There's like don't bother. It's too hard to get commissioners. It's too hard to get community buy-in, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if that's coming from Chief Sweat or if that's just, but we, on the other hand, staff has people coming to us constantly wanting to protect areas of their neighborhood. So that's to learn where this administration is really gonna be in preservation. Are they gonna on the face say that they are supporting all of our efforts, but then not help us through these things like Article 85? It's really confusing. So I think we need eventually the political stuff we need to have some straight talk.
Yeah. Well,
And I think,
sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead. It's like I have a hard time figuring stuff like that out because I have not worked for the city for long, but you guys have more experience. So
Well, I've had 2 conversations with Chief Sweat since he started. It's been very high level stuff. We talked about the positions a little bit. I shared some of my priorities and concerns. The impression that I got, and I certainly don't want to misrepresent him or speak for him, is that there isn't a lot of appetite, whether it's from him or from the administration, I don't know, for making new historic districts. I pointed out that there are some neighborhoods like Charlestown and the North End that should have been districts a long time ago, and that there's maybe some right sizing to do there. I think for years, when the community members come to me and say, we want to be a district, I've had to, sound the alarm and say that's an uphill battle. Just the reality of where we've been over the years and how long it takes and political, opinions on it. And that's why we've tried to explore other tools. Like I tried to work within NDODs or other zoning tools or find other ways to get to the same end goal of protecting historic resources. So I do think it's a conversation we need to have. There are larger conversations happening around the country about historic districts. Some cities are getting rid of their historic districts completely. Some narratives are that historic districts are nothing but gentrification and control and NIMBYism. I think that's something that the preservation community should talk about. And I can definitely advocate for historic districts. And I think if we did economic studies, we would clearly see the benefits of historic districts across many different areas. And I think that would help our case. But
Yeah.
I think that if these are thoughts people are having, we need to address them head on with
Yeah.
stats and real information.
And we're neighborhoods that have never come to talk to us before are starting to come to talk to us, like certain areas of Jamaica Plain, South Boston, where I live. All of a sudden, everyone wants a district, and I just I hear a rumor like that, and I don't know exactly as staff how to move, and I'm sure that it's tricky as a stakeholder to be like, well, you don't really want a district, you want an NDOD. What's that? I don't, it's tricky. But I do think that we have to sort of get some cards on the table with using this group to sort of understand what this administration really is going to support us in.
I agree. At the end of the day, it all comes down to politics and political will. So that's something that we need to be realistic about. But I also think that I think people are wanting historic districts not because they suddenly see the value of their historic neighborhood. It's because of development and overdevelopment, development pressure, and sensitive development. And if we can solve for that problem in another way through Article 80, ideally, then that takes the pressure off of historic districts, and we can focus on making districts where they're really warranted, where we really have a collection of significant places that we can justify as not being a tools to prevent, development or change. So that's where I'd like to focus our energies. I think we have a real opportunity like we've never had before with this Article 80 reform. We need to make sure that we have the appetite at the city, which is where I'm not sure, to introduce some preservation language and processes into Article 80. And that's where I think where we need to be very heavy-handed.
Sounds good to me. All right, I have to fly, you guys.
Yes, I think we're done.
It's 3:30, so.
Good to talk to you.
More to come, everybody. Thank you for
Yeah.
your time.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Hennessy.
guys.
You,
Thanks, Hennessy.
bye.